Hey everyone, it's True Crime Tuesday. Want to get everybody caught up a little bit. First of all, I wanted to before we really get into the missing, I wanted to touch base on two cases. One, the Brian Coburger case, and also the John O'Keefe case. Specifically, and I should call it the Idaho 4 case because those are the victims in this case. But a lot is being made of the evidence that was not properly documented in terms of some cellular review by a Moscow police officer. Now, over the weekend, I was on News Nation discussing this with actually Sarah Izari, excuse me. And it was interesting. I mean, the bottom line is, when you have strong evidence against a defendant, you are always going to try to poke holes in the investigation. You're also always going to try to discredit the investigators. But I have to say, it's very disappointing that this particular officer just found his information and is just now giving it over. Now, some people might ask, how in the world could this happen all these years later? And I'll tell you how it can happen, and this does happen, is specifically when it's total crunch time. In other words, the prosecutor is saying, listen, we have turned over everything, but the defense is saying, well, wait a minute, we think there's still more. What the prosecutor will often do is reach out to each of the agencies involved in the situation, and they'll just say, listen, please scrub everything and make sure there's no additional evidence anywhere. And so what happens is management will come down, it all flows downhill, and they will say, listen, one by one, make sure there's nothing in any file drawers, there's nothing anywhere that you have somehow overlooked, missed, not provided to the prosecutor's office. And so it's very simple. In this case, I believe that is likely what happened. I believe this officer for Moscow looked more closely and realized he failed to turn over documentation, and in fact had documentation, and in some instances it seemed didn't even properly document exactly what he did in terms of the cell information he was analyzing. It's not a good look. I think it's going to be very limited in terms of what this is going to affect. But there are other witnesses that are going to be called by the defense, and that is very, very concerning, I think, certainly for the prosecution team. We shall see if it has any bearing. That's going to be what's most important. Is this information that was not relevant to the time frame, that wasn't relevant specifically to the facts regarding what happened on this particular day, or on the hours in advance or after the crime was committed? We'll see. I want to wait and listen to all the witnesses just to see how important this particular faux pas at best is going to be. What it is going to mean for the prosecution of Brian Coburger. I also want to talk about John O'Keefe. So pivoting to him, the John O'Keefe trial today was pretty unremarkable, I think, other than I think what's really been in the news is the information about John O'Keefe's niece and nephew testifying today. Now, they testified, but there were no cameras allowed. In fact, the media wasn't allowed to live tweet or anything like that. They were allowed to take notes. And the reason that I think this was very interesting and is because I could not understand why, when they've been on the witness list, why, when Karen Reed specifically woke up John O'Keefe's niece, having gone to John O'Keefe's house that evening after she left 34 Fairview, it made no sense to me why the defense side of things, if you will, whether it's in social media or otherwise, has made quite a huge deal about this. And it's perplexing because obviously the niece was a very important piece in terms of stringing together what happened. What happened when Karen Reed returned? What was one of the things she did that morning to essentially cause the wheels to go in motion for Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts to be called? What happened to make that happen? So you can't have a string of events and just not include one important link. And that link was the niece. And that's why she had to be called. Also, you'll recall that Carrie Roberts said that at 5 o'clock in the morning, she received a call from Karen Reed. And for me, I think this is just a huge nugget that seems to be getting overlooked. At 5 a.m., Carrie Roberts testified that Karen Reed called her and told her, Carrie, John is dead. Now, this is at 5. How would she possibly know that if it was true that she had no idea where he was, that she was baffled and confused? Recall, too, Carrie Roberts is the witness that really came off so well. She has absolutely no affiliation with the McCabe's, no affiliation with the Alberts, none with Karen Reed. Her affiliation is with John O'Keefe. She's been a lifelong friend. She loved him. There was no motive in this for her to lie. And she came up so amazing on the stand. Anyone who wants to go back and review her testimony, that's how a good witness testifies. They're truthful. They say the good, the bad, and the ugly. What they say makes sense. I know some of you might tease there were no butt dials, at least that I recall in her testimony. So anyway, I believe that testimony, and I think it is a huge piece that I hope the jury remembers, because it provides so much insight as to what Karen Reed thought and what Karen Reed did, in my opinion. So she was very important. It was very important for his niece to testify. Now let's talk about the nephew. He also testified. From what we know about their testimony, they did talk about relationship issues between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe. This is important because it goes to motive. So, of course, it was imperative that the prosecution again point out relationship issues. If everything was perfect in their relationship, as it may have seemed from the exterior, meaning a lot of people in the bar that evening said they were getting along well. There's been still shots that we've all seen. It seems they're getting along fine. A lot of the testimony is that they got along well, but as we all know, so often relationships look perfect in public, but behind closed doors, they are anything but perfect. And that is certainly the picture that is being painted here. She was definitely wandering or wanting to wander. She kissed another man in John O'Keefe's house, garage area. So it's clear that there were issues. The whole discussion on the Aruba trip, again, those witnesses were crucial, I think, in pointing out issues. And while the prosecution does not have to prove a motive, if the jury was left to think that everything was fine, because as you'll recall, the witnesses all stated things seemed fine that night, that would not leave the true impression of where their relationship was. And that's why it was very important for the prosecution to put witnesses on the stand that had the inside scoop, if you will, the behind the scenes, the behind the curtain look at what was really going on in John O'Keefe and Karen Reed's relationship. So while no one ever wants minors to be on the stand, while I don't know if I can think right off the hand of two juveniles who have suffered more than these children. They've lost their mother, they've lost their father, and then they lost their surrogate godfather, John O'Keefe. And there is no doubt that getting on the stand and discussing all of that will be so impactful for the rest of their lives. But from my understanding, they wanted to testify. From my understanding, loved ones and O'Keefe family members were far more concerned about them than they were concerned about testifying. Look, they wanted the truth out about the issues. And from what I understand, they made some impactful statements. We'll see. We'll see where the jury ends up going on this case. But it was something that you can't withhold that kind of testimony ever. It's too relevant. Some people have asked me, well, why didn't they do this in chambers? And I've seen this done so many different ways with juveniles. I've seen it in chambers. I've seen it off of where they're videotaped for the jury to see. Obviously, they have to be in front of the jury, no matter what the location is. So whether they're sitting back in chambers or sitting in a conference room or sitting someplace else, I mean, the jury has to be able to see them, and so does the defendant. But it did have to be so hard, to see Karen Reed there. And unfortunately, we can't see the facial expressions. And we saw a lot of facial expressions today, more than possibly I have seen in the past from Karen Reed. She was definitely seemingly upset. I mean, kind of had a flurry of, reaching to Yannetti and making eye rolls, kind of, not the rolls isn't the right word, kind of eye movement, and seemingly upset in some of the Brian Higgins statements. But we'll see. The trial is really going along at a slow crawl for those who haven't been able to watch. This is the last day of testimony this week. Next week, there will only be 2 days of testimony. So it's a slow crawl. Many people have asked about Jackson. Now, I did not see, because typically I watch the testimony and I don't always watch the sidebar afterwards or what is said. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I just don't have time or something else has come up. But I had asked, where was Jackson? And of course, many people who had watched the very end, apparently, of the sidebar at the end of trial after the jury had left, apparently, there were statements made that he was going to be gone because I think he might have had another legal obligation. But it was clear, apparently, that he was going to be gone. My whole point that I was trying to make is, if I'm Karen Reed and my future, my freedom, everything is on the line in a murder 2 trial and investigation, I would want my lead attorney there. Some people don't agree with me. Some people thought that, I was trying to make some, backhanded comment. It wasn't backhanded. It was right in your face. That is how I would feel. I would want my lead attorney there. And people can disagree, but whether I knew in advance or didn't know in advance, whether I agreed to it, whether I didn't, I thought this was a crucial time for Alan Jackson to not be there. Sorry, I have something in my eye. A crucial time. Why? Because the Higgins cross-examination was, I think, going fairly well for the defense. They were driving home some points that, while I didn't agree with, in other words, again, spoon feeding about in and out of the Sally Port, when you have those cut throughs, and many of us do, maybe you do at your work. I certainly did at mine. The quickest way to get to my car was I would go through, not the Sally Port, ours was the mechanic shop. So I could very much relate to that. It's where our cars got worked on. And so I would park right out here so I could go through and in and out. So there might be all these circumstances where it looks like I was in there all the time, but I literally was in and then out. And I never thought it was made very clear, although I think Lally tried to clear that up, that the reason there were so many entries is because there were so many exits. Come in, go out. So anyway, just a couple highlights there. Lawyer Schiff and I've invited him to come on. I really do think it is important at this stage, as we're in trial and so many people can't watch trial for 8 hours a day. When I miss portions, I listen on my headphones at night. It's a lot. It's so many hours in the day. So many people are relying on other people to kind of tell them their impressions, what they think might be going on. And I think it really is important to show both sides. I think it is important to show the legal side of things, right? So where my vantage typically is from an investigative side, a fact-driven side, understanding what happens sort of behind the scenes. A lawyer's perspective is so different because their perspective, especially as a defense attorney, is, what is the defense doing? Are they succeeding? Would they be doing the same thing? So I cannot wait to have Lawyer Schiff on. I like him. First of all, I do believe in levity, and I do believe it's important to, I guess, have at least some moments of the non-seriousness. When you think about this case, John O'Keefe, never married, prime of his life, important role to his children, 16-year veteran as a Boston police officer. I was thinking back when I had 16 years in, that was pretty much at my real prime. I mean, that's when you're running and gunning, you're working a million hours, you have so much experience that you are put in charge of very significant investigations. And I know he was working the admin side of things because he needed to have the time to take care of his niece and nephew. I know he was working, I believe, the sex offender registry. But that wasn't going to be forever. And the volume of experience he had as a Boston police officer, I'm sure was called on by others. In any event, I have been seeing online a lot of real negativity toward John O'Keefe. it's really sick. I mean, I just leave a note and I say, stop victim shaming and get off my platform, essentially, because I don't condone that. John O'Keefe did nothing wrong. John O'Keefe was out that night celebrating the fact that his niece got into apparently a school that's difficult to get into. He was celebrating. He was celebrating with close friends. He did nothing wrong. He did nothing wrong. And, I hope everyone on this platform, everyone in the Twitter, true crime community, X community, does not foster that kind of hate and really just displaced vantage or view regarding what kind of person John O'Keefe was, because John O'Keefe was, from all accounts, other than on social media and amongst trolls, and particularly amongst the cult members. And I say the cult members, meaning people who have blindly decided to follow a group that would harass and intimidate witnesses for months and months and months. That's just wrong. I don't want to digress, though. I hope you all might watch Lawyer Schiff and I. It's going to be interesting. He and I have never had a one-on-one type of exchange regarding this privately. So you guys will all see it carry out live. And I think it's important because so many can't be in that courtroom. And, you'll be getting two completely different vantage points of how we think things are going and what we think about different witnesses. All right, I want to move on to our missing. First, let's talk about Caleb Harris. Caleb Harris, most of you know, disappeared from Corpus Christi. He's a 21-year-old student who was studying at Corpus Christi A&M. And in the very early morning hours, so it was a Sunday evening going into Monday, and he had school on Monday. He was supposed to go fishing on Monday. He had purchased some lures. He was talking to his family. He had ordered Uber Eats for his lunch the next day. That was on his back porch. And at 3 a.m., right around that time, he just completely disappeared with no sign, no trace, no sign of foul play. For anyone asking that is in late regarding this case, nothing with the roommates, nothing there. Camera footage is weak, but has still been reviewed. No one believes that anyone who knew him was involved in any way in his disappearance. However, I am very convinced that he went with someone. And unfortunately, that something happened. Something devastatingly happened. But I have not ruled out, and nor should anyone, I don't think, that he could still be alive, because he could. What's really imperative is, even though it was that hour of the morning, that people continue to keep Caleb Harris, his name, his photo on their platforms. If you have a social media platform, put it out there. You just never know who might see it and who might have seen something at some point. Aliens did not take him. I'm very convinced that he didn't just decide to run away. He left barefoot. He left without his car. He left without a wallet. He left without any identification. He had nothing. And that makes no sense to walk out of your life that way. As far as any sort of self-harm, it doesn't seem to bear out either. It doesn't seem to bear out because, again, they searched high and low in that area and no sign of Caleb. And this was right after he went missing. In fact, a good friend of mine who we were FBI agents together, what they call first office agents, FOAs in Houston together. And he was happened to be in Corpus Christi right that morning. And I was speaking with him just to see if he knew anybody there, because I knew he was in that area or from that area. And he said, "Oh my gosh, Jen, I'm right here." And he immediately went to the site of where Caleb lived. Of course, it was heavy with police activity, with divers, even though the water actually in and around that little bridge is very shallow. But he sent me a lot of pictures. I ended up posting a few of those on Twitter. Those were from my buddy. They weren't from the news media or anything else. And so it was a vast, vast search. It involved so many agencies. It just seems to rule that out. I really believe he left with someone. And I really, really hope he's okay. Moving on to the other mystery, Sebastian Rogers. Oh my gosh, this case. What I love about this case is there are so many people that are keeping Sebastian Rogers in the forefront. And that can only help find Sebastian Rogers one way or the other. Law enforcement, again, for people who don't know, so I should just set it up a little bit. Sebastian Rogers, 15 years old, on the spectrum. He left, also barefoot, and it was in the early morning hours. According to his mother, the last independent sign of life was on the 25th of February. And this has been a big bone of contention for me personally. I just think the flyers and the messaging from law enforcement needs to be crystal clear. I've seen a lot of messaging that says he disappeared, or was actually, their words are last seen the 26th. It's confusing because in the interviews I've heard, Katie Proudfoot specifically says she heard a loud noise or a thud. That's the exact word she used at one point. And she hollered, get to bed, basically. That was the general message. Didn't go in and look at him. So I don't believe she did. I haven't seen that interview. If she's changed her mind, maybe I'm going to check the chat here to see if some of you have. I saw somebody say that she checked in on him after midnight, and that's why they wrote the 26th. I'm just not thinking that is accurate, at least from what I understand. But the bottom line is, the good news is that searches, geez, I've got like a tongue-tied thing going on. Searches are continuing for Sebastian, and they have over this, Memorial Day weekend. Seth, his father, continues to search. He continues to be prominently on YouTube channels and on mainstream media, been on News Nation recently. I saw the segment with Elizabeth Vargas. I'm so proud always to be a part of News Nation. I'm not trying to do a plug, but what I love about News Nation, I hope I see some hearts fly up. I don't have my glasses on yet, but they put the missing as such an important component on all their shows. So Banfield is the crime show, right? That all she does is crime. You have Chris Cuomo that is primarily politics, but he keeps the missing going too. Vargas always has a pulse on the missing all day long. Marnie Hughes has a whole show about the missing. I've been honored to join her on multiple segments where they'll spend a half an hour on one case and we'll dissect it. Not just me, many other contributors and experts to talk about from the police vantage what is going on with these cases. So my hat's off to News Nation for continuing to do that. And they've done it so well with the Sebastian Rogers case. I wish they would feature Caleb Harris more. And hopefully they will. I know Chris Cuomo was the first to feature Caleb Harris of any network. So that was the first national exposure. But anyway, moving on to regarding Sebastian, I love the fact that they're continuing to look. I get asked all the time, did he run away or did Katie kill him? Or did he die accidentally and they covered it up? I have to keep the hope that he truly did walk out. I have to keep that hope. We all do. Nothing's off the table, but certainly law enforcement has pushed in that direction. And I will say, and I've said it before, so I'm sorry if you guys have ever watched me talk about this before, and I'll keep it super brief, but the last case I was involved in was literally a boy on the spectrum, and his mother failed the polygraph test. We thought she was involved. We ended up finding him in water on a secondary search of the waterways in and around his house. And, really, really tragic. But remember, moms fail lie detector tests for different reasons. In this case, she had failed to lock the door, and he was known to get out if he could. And that is why she felt responsible. So again, on polygraph, you only get about 2 questions you ask. And one of those questions, were you responsible or were you involved, I think was the question, in the disappearance of your son. And she said no, failed, but it was because in the back of her mind, she felt responsible because she did not properly lock the doors that night. So anyway, I'm always apprehensive in these types of cases to blame the parents without one iota of evidence that they're involved. I know there's a lot of statements that have been made. There's a lot of, actions that have been done. For instance, leaving the house sticks out. But that's not evidence that you killed somebody or covered it up. I know a lot has been made about the 911 call, that it was made to the sheriff's office as opposed through, the 911 service. But I can tell you, I just actually posted this on Twitter. I was headed to a tennis match. I'll make this short. I was headed to a tennis match and I stopped at Hungry Hank's, which is a big convenience store. And I go in to get a drink, for my tennis match. And when I walked in, I saw the clerk off to my left. This was really early in the morning I think that match was on a Sunday. So like 7:00 on a Sunday, there was nobody in there but me and the clerk. And I saw him, he was like stocking shelves. And I said, I don't think I said anything to him. I went over, I got my drink, and then I went to the counter. I'm like, hey, where are you? Because I was in a huge hurry because I was running late. So I'm screaming, where are you? And I said, listen, I'm just going to put $3 here for my drink. I'm headed out. And as I turned in a reflection, I saw he was on the ground behind the counter. I'm a midget. So I didn't see him. I jumped over that counter. I mean, he was frothing at the mouth. He was a thinner man, about 40s, late 30s, early 40s, not the type that you would normally think would have a heart attack or anything. And he laid there, wiped off the froth, coming out of his mouth, and gave him 2 puffs, because back then that's what we did, and started compressions. And then my cell phone was right up on the counter from when I jumped over. I stopped compressions, reached up, grabbed my cell phone, one hand compressions, the other I was, 911. They were so unresponsive. I can't remember whether it was that call or another call where they actually said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you've reached the wrong, 911 section. We're going to transfer you to another one." It was so delayed. And I remember the fire station was just right down the road. I bet you it was 1 or 2 miles away. And it took forever for them to get there. First of all, when you give compressions and you're by yourself, nobody came in during this time. It's exhausting if you're doing it right. If you're doing it right, you'll often break a rib. You were literally compressing the heart up and down, trying to breathe for that person. And I remember feeling so frustrated. I have totally digressed. Sorry about that. I do want to tell you how it ended, though. It ended up ultimately not well, but kind of well. His family wanted to see him alive to say goodbye, and he lived through that. I kept calling the hospital, after my match and everything. I had to have another player actually come pick me up, because the fire trucks and ambulance, they, in a cardiac situation, they park multiple fire trucks there because they need multiple people to help with the compressions and things. And it just can involve more than just one person. So often, and my car literally got trapped in. And so anyway, I left. One of my tennis players came and picked me up, and we took off, but I kept calling. And it was so heartwarming to me, because the family thanked me for keeping him alive long enough for them to say goodbye. And he did ultimately pass. But back to the whole reason I talk about 911 operators is it can be super frustrating. And I don't know if that was the reason, but if I had to ever do that again, if I were in that situation, I would literally Google fire station near me and call it up and get that number and call them directly and say, because it would have saved so much time. He could have been, I didn't have a BVM on me, bag valve mask. I didn't have any way to really give positive air, compressions as time goes by. When you get in the 5-10 minute mark, I mean, it's just hard. Anyway, I digress. So I don't know but a lot has been made about the fact that the call was not made through 911. And there have been other cases of murderers not calling 911 on purpose. In other words, people who took their spouses' lives, people who were responsible for the murder, purposefully not calling 911, I guess because of the delay that they hoped it would achieve, and also that call would not be recorded, right? 911, you're going to have your call recorded. In any event, there's a lot of little things that are bothersome. Another one that bothered me, and I did a whole live on this, or at least part of a live on this, was the whole Uvalde team. And everybody, or many people, said, "Oh, the Uvalde searchers, they're terrible searchers. They're, not vetted." I want to touch on this for a quick second. I didn't plan on touching on this, but because we have no huge report to give on Sebastian, other than the searches that took place over the weekend and the importance of all of us using our platforms to keep his face and name out. There's been a lot that I've seen about searchers and needing backgrounds done and needing, vetting and I have such mixed emotions about this. And I'll tell you why. Because as an FBI agent, when you're out there searching and conducting these searches, there's only so many agents. There's only so many people who have been, quote, properly trained, who have been, through classes and had, a lot of experience. And obviously we're all vetted. But I would have never dreamed in all the searches I've been on, when we have volunteers show up to help walk a line, where you're given this amount of line and you just need to look in that area for any signs of evidence, for anything at all, indicia of that crime. I would never think that, because you're not trained like me, we can't use you. It's concerning to me. Yes. Would it be optimum to have every single person with a background check that's going to walk a line? Would it be optimum that they had done many checks and been through a police academy and been trained on sort of how to keep focus and what to look for and how a grid search works, and so that they could go off and actually run their own group? That would be optimum. But I would argue, I would rather have dozens, if not hundreds, of people helping, especially initially in a search, and be able to cover more ground rapidly than to have far fewer numbers just doing the boots on the ground searches. So I'm conflicted. I see a lot of good points in what's being said on vetting and such, but I see a lot of missed opportunities. And I have seen volunteers that hand out flyers, volunteers that take their time, their energy away from their family, that search in heat, that search through swamps, that aren't criminals. They're good people. And you know what? It's their way of being able to help. So many of us want to help, right? Whether you establish a platform that can help people, or whether you volunteer, whether you donate, whatever you do. I love volunteers. This is just me. I don't need to have them all vetted. I don't need to have people with vast experience. I need good people out there for the right reasons, searching, handing out flyers. So for those of you that have been seeing probably what I'm seeing fly about, I would just say to I just hope some people temper their view and recall when some of these people were just volunteers. They had done no training. They had no licensing or anything, but they helped. So anyway, just something to consider there. That's all I've got for you, but I need to look at this chat. Again, I really thank you all for understanding that I'm new at this. I initially, I think for 2 months, I think I've been up about 4 months. I think my first video was at the very end of January. So February, March, April, about 3.5 months. But unfortunately, I made a decision that I wanted to do kind of these datelines, where I spoke with people who were just amazing in their field of expertise. I really hope you go back and look at especially the initial videos that we did, and even the latest ones. I mean, Chris Swecker really almost ran the FBI, honestly, when it came to all criminal investigations. And He was so kind to interview with me. And, he's going places. He's not done. I assure you of that. And his view and his knowledge about terrorism and about the border crisis, it's worth a listen. We did a part 2 series. Told you I'm tongue-tied today a little bit, probably a little tired. But the second part of that, we still haven't put out. We're going to put it out. I'm working on how I want, that to look in terms of editing and pictures and maybe movies, a few movie clips in there. But he's amazing. And the earlier ones, with the first FBI profiler, he was partners with John Douglas. Greg McCrary is amazing. And we talked about the cases he was involved in. He's just that type of knowledge and experience is going to die because, they're not going to be around forever. I had a polygrapher on that still does polygraphs multiple times a day. He still works for the government, even though he's a retired FBI agent. He contracts. He's amazing. Eric Johnson, talking about Waco and Ruby Ridge and kind of dispelling. I know some of you are very young, but really dispelling some of the myths of, people who really hate the government and what they want to think happened there. I'm working on getting a guy, his first name is Mark, and he was actually in charge of the evidence recovery after everything burned down. He will tell you that literally skulls with one gunshot, one after another, after another, after another. They were all killed, or I should say assisted suicide inside of there, rather than be taken, if you will, by the government. I know that had to be so hard for him. I was not involved in that search. I was a new agent. I was in Houston at the time and kind of doing behind the scenes. All of us were. Anything that was needed to aid in that investigation we were involved in. But these are people that really were amazing, at least for me to interview. Dr. Gary Bricado, he's brilliant. He's brilliant. And no one has studied the mass murderer mind more than him, or at least equal with him. No one. He's studied every single mass murder in the world. He talks about it. Anyway, I just, for those of you new to the channel, or I really encourage you, if you have a chance, while you're driving to work, while you're vacuuming, whenever you have a free moment, take a listen, see what you think. For those of you who are members, and we just started to roll this out, I was encouraged to do this and to kind of help alleviate some of the huge costs of all that editing that was involved early on. And fortunately, I have an amazing mod now who is just a wealth of knowledge. Hoping to get a couple of more to help her out because it's a lot of time and effort. I have 2 amazing editors that I'm working with now. My other editor was amazing, but that was the big time. It was really super expensive, but it's all to say that I'm learning. I love doing these lives. I'm going to start looking at your questions here. So I appreciate your patience with me as I learn a new platform and, connect with you. All right, here we go. Glasses donned. Sorry, you got to see me up close. Oh, thank you. Thank you on the replay. Let's see. Thank you so much. Yes, that's true. This is can be dangerous to the community if volunteers aren't vetted. I would just say for the most part, I've never been a part of a search where there was a rogue volunteer that harmed anyone. So I just haven't seen that. I love that. Yeah, I love Dr. Gary. He is great. All right. Yes, always trying to keep it real. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. This live, I thought it was going to be 20 minutes and it turned out to be much longer than that. Thank you for tuning in. We'll always do True Crime Tuesday. Appreciate each and every one of you. Until next time, may justice be served.